one thing to accomplish. Get that young girl out of there alive. That's all. I understand. I think you do.
Come with me as we explore the world of the unknown. A world that most are too afraid to look into. Welcome to Taboo, Matthew.
Hey everybody, and welcome once again to Taboo Matthew. I'm your host Matt Sheets, and this is going to be episode 5 of the podcast. I appreciate you all for tuning in. I took a little hiatus there for a minute, had to get my mind right, get some things figured out with my life, so I'm sorry for the delay, but as always, we will resume your scheduled programming. So, today's episode is going to be on the Oklahoma City bombing, which I think most of us are familiar with. I wanted to do this because I'd researched a little bit into it quite a while ago, maybe 15 years ago, and just realized right off the bat how many inconsistencies there are. And with these recent attacks by soldiers that were trained at Fort Liberty or Fort Bragg or whatever you want to call it nowadays, I thought it'd be a great time to revisit the story of the Alfred P. Murrah bombing, and most notably Timothy McVeigh, who some of you may know was stationed there when he was, I don't know if it was when he was going through basic training or after, but yeah, he's a Bragg alum. So, as always, I'm going to give you my disclaimer, my research that I did for this. Everything was presented to me as fact. So for the sake of this episode, I'm going to present it to you exactly as it was presented to me, as fact. And this is intended for entertainment purposes only. The first part of this, I went to our official sources that our masters are so kind to bestow upon us, mostly Wikipedia and FBI.gov. There's a few others, but I kind of pieced it together mostly from those two sources. So here we go. The Oklahoma City bombing is described as a domestic terrorist truck bombing. It occurred on April 19th of 1995. The accused perpetrators, who the FBI and U.S. government say worked alone, are Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. There was a few others that were in there. We'll kind of touch on them a little bit, but nobody that the media or the FBI or the ATF or any of them really wanted to shine any kind of real light on, which I think is kind of telling in and of itself. They described Timothy and Terry as anti-government extremists. They say McVeigh was the mastermind and Nichols was the bomb maker. The explosion occurred at 9:02 a.m. on April 19th, 1995. It killed 167 people, 19 of which were children. And then it also injured another 684 people and destroyed more than one-third of the Alfred P. Murrah building. The blast damaged 324 other buildings and did an estimated $652 million in damage. It's quite the explosion. It's described as the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. And April 19th, 1995 is also significant, as it was the 2-year anniversary of the Waco siege against the Branch Davidians down there in Waco, Texas. The Branch Davidians, as some of you know, was led by Vernon Howell, a.k.a. David Koresh. So officially, on April 14th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh checked into a hotel in Junction City, Kansas. The next day, he rented a 1993 Ford F700 box truck from Ryder, using the alias Robert D. Kling. The day after, on April 16th, McVeigh and Nichols drove to Oklahoma City and parked the getaway car, a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis, a few blocks from the Alfred P. Murrah building. The Regency Towers apartment's security cameras captured a video of McVeigh and Nichols parking the car and leaving in a 1984 GMC pickup truck that belonged to Nichols. The camera also caught Timothy removing the license plate from the Mercury and leaving a note over the VIN plate that read, "Not abandoned. Please do not tow. Will move by April 23rd. Needs battery and cable." McVeigh and Nichols then returned to Kansas. The 2 days leading up to the bombing, McVeigh and Nichols went to Geary Lake State Park and filled the back of the Ryder truck with homemade explosives. 13 barrels, which were held in place by boards they had nailed into the floor of the truck, were then filled with the ammonium nitrate nitromethane mixture, which they weighed out using a bathroom scale. Each barrel weighed about 500 pounds, according to the reports. Timothy added more explosives to the driver's side of the cargo bay so he could ignite the explosives at close range with a Glock 21 pistol in case the primary fuses failed. During the trial of Timothy McVeigh, Lori Fortier, the wife of one of McVeigh's alleged conspirators, stated that McVeigh had designed the box truck as a shape charge. Timothy added a dual fuse ignition system that could be accessed from the cab of the truck by drilling 2 holes under the seat and through the body of the truck. He ran two time-delayed fuses through these holes through plastic fish tank tubing to shock tubes that would then ignite 350 pounds of Tovex Blastrite gel sausages that he had stolen from a rock quarry, I believe in Arizona. It might have been in Kansas. Either way, he stole them from a rock quarry where they stashed all these explosives. The high-grade sausage explosives would then ignite the 13 barrels of the explosives that they had made, the fertilizer bombs. 9 of the 13 barrels were filled with ammonium nitrate and nitromethane, and the other 4 were filled with a mixture of fertilizer and 4 gallons of diesel fuel. After finishing their preparation in the box truck, the 2 men parted ways. The officials at the time estimated the cost of the bomb was around $5,000, which would be around $11,000 today, a little over double. Inflation. Gotta love it. Timothy McVeigh's original plan had been to detonate the bomb at 11 a.m., but on the morning of the 19th, he had a change of heart and decided to detonate the bomb at 9 a.m. Timothy reportedly had with him an envelope containing pages from the Turner Diaries as he drove to the Alfred P. Murrah building that morning. For those of you that don't know, the Turner Diaries is a fictional book. I believe it was written in the 70s by some professor somewhere. It's about an Aryan group breaking out and taking over the government, and then the U.S. kind of falls into chaos, and there's a race war. Also that morning, Timothy was wearing a T-shirt which had printed on it Sic Semper Tyrannis, which is Latin for thus always to tyrants. For those that don't know, this was supposed to have been shouted by Brutus when he assassinated Julius Caesar, and also by John Wilkes Booth after he assassinated Abraham Lincoln. The T-shirt also said the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants, which was a quote that's, I think, attributed to Thomas Jefferson, if I'm not mistaken. Among other things, he was reported to have a bumper sticker in the envelope that said, "When the government fears the people, there's liberty. When the people fear the government, there's tyranny." Underneath that, Timothy had written, "Maybe now there will be liberty," with a hand-copied quote by John Locke asserting that a man has a right to kill someone who takes away his liberty. Now, what that quote exactly is, I don't know if that's verbatim. I couldn't find a definitive answer. I found a couple different ones. But the consensus seems to be the quote by John Locke asserts someone has the right to kill someone that takes away his liberty. If any of you can find that, I'd love to hear it. Okay. So then, at 8:57 on the morning of the 19th, the apartment building where Timothy had dropped his getaway car recorded the Ryder truck driving towards the Alfred P. Murrah building. So, obviously, Supposedly, anyway, Timothy McVeigh really liked this route right next to these apartment buildings. This is reportedly when Timothy lit the 5-minute fuse. 3 minutes later, still a block away, Timothy McVeigh lit the 2-minute fuse. He then parked the truck in a drop-off zone for the daycare center, got out, locked the truck, and walked on foot to his getaway car, dropping the keys to the Ryder truck on the way. At 9:02 a.m., the Ryder truck containing all the aforementioned, namely the 4,800 pounds of explosives, detonated in front of the north side of the 9-story Alfred P. Murrah building. The blast destroyed 1/3 of the granite and rebar-enforced concrete structure, creating a 30-foot wide, 8-foot deep crater in the street right next to the building. Timothy McVeigh was said to then walk to the Mercury he had parked a few blocks away and left the scene. Shortly after all this, McVeigh was pulled over on Interstate 35 for not having a license plate on the 1997 Mercury Marquis. The state trooper was said to have noticed a bulge under Timothy's jacket, and when he asked Timothy, he admitted that, yeah, it's a gun. I got a gun in here. So the officer arrested Timothy for possessing an illegal firearm. 3 days later, they linked Timothy to the bombing, and on August 10, 1995, Timothy McVeigh was indicted with 11 federal charges, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, destruction with the use of explosives, and 8 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of the law enforcement officers. So just those people. Even though it killed 167, 19 of them children, they only charged him for first-degree murder for the deaths of the law enforcement officers. Now I want to make a point here that 19 children were killed. But the authorities thought the most pressing of the deaths that needed to be charged were the killings of these 8 law enforcement officers. So that kind of tells you where they put themselves, above the importance of the lives of children. On February 20th, 1996, the court granted a change of venue and ordered that the case be transferred from Oklahoma City to the district court in Denver to be presided over by District Judge Richard Paul Matsch. McVeigh instructed his lawyers to use a necessity defense, but they ended up not doing so. To use this defense, they would have had to prove that McVeigh was in imminent danger from the government. McVeigh argued that imminent did not necessarily mean immediate, which legally I think he is right, which is probably why his lawyers didn't decide to use that defense. McVeigh wanted his lawyers to argue that the bombing was a justifiable response to the crimes of the U.S. government at Waco 2 years earlier. On June 2nd, 1997, McVeigh was found guilty on all 11 counts from his indictment. This is all federally indicted, too. So he was then sentenced to death. On April 21st, 1995, Terry Nichols learned he was wanted for questioning in connection with the Oklahoma City bombing. He then turned himself in and consented to a search of his home. The search turned up blasting caps, detonating cords, ground ammonium nitrate, barrels made of plastic similar to fragments found at the bombing site, 33 firearms, anti-government warfare literature, whatever that means, a receipt for ammonium nitrate fertilizer with McVeigh's fingerprints on it, a telephone credit card that McVeigh had used when he was shopping for bomb-making equipment, and a hand-drawn map of downtown Oklahoma City. So either Terry Nichols had a thing for keeping mementos, or you know. Either way, I'd say that's quite the convenient amount of evidence on Mr. Nichols. Convenient for the case of the federal prosecutors, obviously, not for Nichols himself. Nichols was held as a material witness to the bombing until he was charged on May 10th. At his lengthy trial, Terry was acquitted of use of a weapon of mass destruction, but was found guilty of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, as well as 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter for, again, the deaths of these 8 law enforcement officers. Both these trials were quite lengthy, and there's a lot out there on them. I mean, I could do a podcast, a 2-3-part podcast on each trial. I mean, there's just a lot you can look up and still find some videos, though it's a little bit harder than it used to be, because a lot of the information has been suppressed for reasons that we will get into, or that will become apparent when we get into kind of these inconsistencies. I'm not going to go into all of it to save us some time, but obviously they found both of those men guilty and sentenced McVeigh to death. And Terry Nichols, I can't remember exactly what his sentence was. For some reason, I did not write it down. One more thing worth mentioning, another man, Michael Fortier, was arrested and charged with having prior knowledge of the bombing plot. After his cooperation with the investigators and testifying at both trials, he was never convicted of any of the charges. They were all dropped. His wife, as we mentioned earlier, also testified at McVeigh's trial. I'm not sure if she testified at Nichols. Okay, so that's a real quick rundown of the official narrative of what the FBI and Wikipedia and the media say happened. They say that's objectively true, which, once you start looking into this, is just bullshit right off the jump. So here's what I could find. Right off the bat, when you look into these things, the main thing that sticks out to anyone is they have a video of McVeigh parking the Ryder truck near the daycare center at the Alfred P. Murrah building. And on that video, there's another man that gets out of the passenger side of the Ryder truck and walks away with Timothy McVeigh. This man is not Terry Nichols. Okay? For a long time, he was known as John Doe number 2. But then that just went away. Who is this man? So immediately that tells anyone that they're lying in the official narrative. They don't even try to account for him. That's how little they respect us. That they don't even try to tell you, hey, this is who this is. Right? Because I think they know it's probably one of them, one of their boys. ATF, FBI, CIA, one of those spooks. I watched, or at least started to watch, many videos, podcasts, etc. in researching this episode. Many people are putting out videos with, I guess, the guise or putting it out there implied that they are truthers or they're alternative media and things of that nature. None of them, save for a few, even bring up this man who got out of the Ryder truck with Timothy McVeigh. So if you're going to do any research into this, I think that'll be the easiest way to see who's full of shit and who's actually trying to find the truth. Because anybody trying to find the truth is going to show immediately, hey, there's a second man that's not even accounted for. It's so obvious it can't be ignored. On top of the video, 24 witnesses, as well as that video, talked about a man, John Doe number 2 is what he was originally called, getting out of this truck with Timothy McVeigh and walking away right before the explosion. The FBI official records don't even mention it. And then the FBI goes on to also claim that they lost the video of McVeigh parking the Ryder truck that morning. But I've seen the video. I mean, you can find it on the internet. Like I said, it's not going to be on YouTube like it would have used to have been. It's not going to be, but there's some on Rumble. I believe I saw it on Instagram once. So again, immediately, it's easy to distinguish who is lying about this bombing just from that one fact alone. But there's also more. Initially, there were multiple reports of a second and possibly even a third explosive device found inside the building. But then those reports, just like the reports of John Doe number 2, just disappeared. I saw a video of one of the volunteers, a nurse named Tony Garrett, who was helping to move some of the bodies to a makeshift morgue that they'd set up in the playground outside the building. She stated that everyone had to be evacuated while trying to search for survivors. And, well, they were searching for survivors and recovering bodies, obviously. But they put out this evacuation order after they had found another explosive inside the building. She then went on to say that at least 4 people involved with the rescue efforts had told her there was in fact a second explosive found inside the building, and that there was a sophisticated timer device that had been set to go off 10 minutes after the first explosion, and that this timer was thought to have malfunctioned. These are eyewitnesses. Some of these people actually saw this device being taken out of the building after the explosion. There are also multiple videos that I saw of witnesses claiming they talked to many people that were at the scene that either heard that there were explosive devices located in the building or even saw them being removed. An investigative reporter named J.D. Cash conducted interviews with hundreds of people related to the Oklahoma City bombing. He stated that the assistant fire marshal for the Oklahoma City firefighters, Dick Miller, stated that there were multiple explosive devices that were moved out of the building immediately after the bombing. Now, I think there's a lot of people, explosive experts and the like, that claim that the explosion as it took place could never have happened from a truck parked outside, especially that type of explosive device. It could have never done that kind of damage to a building made of concrete and reinforced with steel like that. Now, it's worth mentioning that I watched some videos and listened to some things where people were saying, well, some of the explosive devices that they were talking about getting pulled out of the building after the explosion were actually explosive devices that the ATF had in there that they had confiscated from other people, blah, blah, blah. Even so, which I think is bullshit, the ATF stated officially that they did not have any explosive devices in the building. So I think that's a little bit of damage control, personally. Another thing worth noting, in my opinion, is the initial report right after the blast through the media and through official channels in the first couple days was that 2 Middle Eastern-looking men were seen leaving the area suspiciously after the bombing. Now, most likely, these 2 Middle Eastern-looking men were probably Timothy McVeigh and John Doe number 2, but there's a chance that there were other men there that were seen leaving the area. And when I hear Middle Eastern-looking men, there's one place my mind goes, and that's, of course, our greatest ally. It's been almost 30 years now since this bombing, and in that time, they've whittled this narrative down. I mean, just whittled it and whittled it. It's been changed at least 3 or 4 times from what I could see, and a couple of them were early on, which is understandable, right? As new evidence comes to light, you're going to change it, but some of them are just blatantly just changing it into something that it just was not. But I think it's important we keep that in mind, that it was changed multiple times. Along those lines, for the first couple days after the bombing, the media was asking all these questions about the second man in the Ryder van. They were asking about these multiple explosives that were found inside the building. They were asking the real questions that true media should ask. And then seemingly overnight, the narrative changed, and it was all Timothy McVeigh. They just had it nailed down that it was just Timothy McVeigh. How did that happen? If these are all independent media, Why would they just all overnight change the story? So then that begs the question, who coordinated all these different media outlets to drop any questions and focus in on this one narrative that's clearly lacking in many important details? I mean, we've only gotten to a couple of them so far. But in the midst of all this, and I'll go on the record and say I'm not a huge fan of the police. Do I think there's some good police out there? I think there's ones that have good intentions, right? But it's hard to be a good person and a policeman, in my opinion, when you are enforcing corrupt laws that violate the rights, our constitutional rights. I mean, they just do. But the bright spot in all this is I came upon what I would consider a hero in all this. A man named Terry Yakey. He was a sergeant with the Oklahoma City Police, and he was one of the first to respond to the scene after the blast. In his initial police report, he outlined all the discrepancies in the situation, right? All the witness accounts of multiple people getting out of the Ryder truck, of it not looking, like the explosion came from outside the building. Just all these different things. And then he was told by his department he needed to refile his report with this official narrative of what had happened. Then when he went to investigate the building that night of the blast, because he thought there was, he could just feel there was something off about it. He was told by some agents, some people who said they were agents from an unknown agency, they told him just plain and simple, leave. This is our investigation now. You don't have jurisdiction. You need to go. And then after he went back a few days later and started investigating the building, his life was actually threatened by higher-ups in the Oklahoma City Police Department. It wasn't even just, hey, stop or you're going to lose your job anymore. It's reported that they were telling him, hey, if you don't stop, bad things are going to happen. Ironically, of course, a little over a year after the bombing, Sergeant Yakey killed himself with a gunshot wound to his head. But before he shot himself in the head, he beat himself all over his feet and body to the point of leaving bruises, as well as cutting himself all over his wrists, arms, and neck. The gunshot wound to his head was somehow at a downward trajectory. So somehow he was holding the gun up and then down towards his head, which, not impossible, right? You could do it, but that accompanied with the bruises and him questioning authority, I think we can all read between the lines on what happened to old Terry. So I'd like to give a shout out to Terry Yakey and his family. I would consider that a heroic effort, and again, he paid the ultimate price for it. Now, there was also eyewitness reports of a bomb squad truck that was parked right across the street from the Alfred P. Murrah building 2 hours before the blast. So, could they have just been somebody getting ready to go do something else? Sure. But that's a very suspicious timing. As well, somebody called the executive secretariat's office 24 minutes before the blast and said that the Alfred P. Murrah building had been bombed. So either they were a seer or they had some inside knowledge that something was going to happen. These next points are kind of just some weird things that just kind of tie in. I'm just going to hit on real quick. And if they interest you, I highly recommend you go look into them, because when taken with everything else, I think they paint the picture of what this truly was. Taken each one by themselves, you could say, yeah, that's kind of happenstance. It not really important. But when you account for the totality of all the circumstances, it begins to create a bigger picture. And that's why we do this, folks. So Governor Frank Kading of Oklahoma City's brother, Mark Kading, had been working on a novel about a terrorist bombing in Oklahoma City before April 1995. So he was working on this novel that ironically really fits into what happened. In the novel, there's a character named Thomas McVeigh. Also, when Representative Charles Key tried to put together an oversight committee to look into the many discrepancies in the case, Governor Kading shut it down. And he stated, and I quote, "People need to have more faith and trust in the federal government and its agencies." End quote. What a joke, right? We need to have more trust in the people that are just constantly just fucking us in the ass. That's quite the statement. Many explosives experts, as I kind of stated before, claim that the blast had to have come from inside of the building. I watched a couple videos, and I've seen others in the past saying that the size and type of the bomb, there's just no way it could have possibly done the damage it did. As well, the official narrative, they upgraded the size of the bomb several times in the official record throughout the years, as it became more and more obvious that what they were claiming was impossible. Right back to this Charles Key, this Oklahoma representative who is actually, he wrote a book about the bombing called The Final Report, The Bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Building. And he's done, I think, a documentary or two about it. He really fought for the truth to come out. And I don't think it went so well for him. But he fought the good fight, and that's commendable. So I recommend anyone seeking the truth on this matter, go read his book, watch his documentary. He was one of the few good ones. And then one of the possibly most damning rumors that I heard from multiple sources about this is some federal agents, specifically ATF and FBI agents, received messages telling them not to go to work that day. It's worth noting that this is 9:02 a.m. Obviously, most government officials are in the office at 9 o'clock, right? They work 9 to 5s. Those FBI, ATF, I want to say DEA as well. Those offices were mostly empty when the explosion happened. So do with that information what you may. But I think that tells us all we need to know, right, folks? And then the last thing I want to get into real quick before I give my opinion is Timothy McVeigh. Timothy actually showed up to the Waco standoff as one of the protesters. He was already what they'd call radicalized against the government, and he could see when they were in there gassing and burning children just because they were having a standoff that it wasn't right. And he went to go speak his opinion on that. Seems a bit shady, given what happened 2 years later. Timothy McVeigh also complained about a pain in his ass from a military-implanted microchip. And some of the craziest things I saw were when they executed Timothy McVeigh, I believe it was in 2001, he was said to have been still breathing after his execution. And even the prison officials afterwards stated that the hearse they used to transport his dead body was a decoy. Now, I think their implication with that is they didn't want people to try to take his body or something, but I think it's more telling than that. I think Timothy McVeigh was working with some very powerful people. Terry Nichols, in fact, said in court that the FBI was involved in the plot. And when he tried to testify on behalf of himself, the judge put a gag order on him so that he could not, and that he could not spread this information that the judge deemed not beneficial for whatever reason. So that's basically the official narrative, and then now the many inconsistencies. And there's more. I'm sure if you dig and dig and dig, there's quite a few more. But I think those ones really paint the picture and tell us what happened. So now we'll get into my opinion of what I think that is. And it's smoke and mirrors, my friend, smoke and mirrors. I think it's all a part of this elaborate show that our masters stage for us. This is clearly their false flag that they used to allow them to pass the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which basically was a precursor or led to the Patriot Act 6 years later. I mean, we can all see that, right? Anyone with the ability to think for themselves. This false flag was how they justified extending their powers and taking more freedoms in the name of combating domestic terrorism. It allowed them to do away with habeas corpus in almost every situation and just further infringe upon Americans' rights at their will. And the fact that there are people who don't see that shows me that most people just want to be led, right? They don't care if they're being told the truth. They just want to have a leader that they can look up to and say, hey, yeah, that's my guy. You know, he's the one leading. Which also is a double-edged sword, because then if shit goes wrong, they don't want to have accountability on themselves, right? Then they can just blame somebody else. I think most of us are like that. It's easy and it's convenient. But it makes me really question if we could ever truly have a nation of free people. I think you could, but I think once it got to a certain size, it's almost impossible. And it would take vigilance and hard work every single day. Because, you see, to be free, you have to take accountability for every aspect of your life, not just what's easy or convenient. And I don't think most people want that. Now, don't get me wrong when I say false flag. Am I saying that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had no part in this? No, I'm not. I'm not at all. What I'm saying is, as with many other events, a good example being this supposed plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, these feds, they come in and they stir someone up to do something. Then they use that as a cover to pull off some kind of event that serves their agenda. I think the two patsies, Timothy and Terry, they planned this bombing in full cooperation with members from the ATF and FBI, and that was the cover for the FBI and ATF to detonate this high-tech explosive that did most of this damage. So again, I'm not saying that there was not explosives in the Ryder truck and that Timothy McVeigh didn't think that he was blowing up that building. I'm sure he did. But I truly believe that there was another explosive used, and probably even another one that didn't go off. Now, why did they do all this? I got a few different ideas. One I already mentioned, the passing of that act. Because the passing of that act gave the government of this corporation that we call America just more power. And they just love power. They love ruling, and they love being the authority figure that is just above reproach. I also read somewhere that it was to destroy some evidence in the building that the ATF or the FBI or the DEA might possibly have had, possibly even pertaining to Waco. Maybe even Ruby Ridge. What that evidence is, I'm still trying to figure that out. I couldn't find anything definitive, but if I ever do, I will definitely report that to you all. But what I would also like to know is if McVeigh and Nichols knew these guys they were working with were the feds, right? Because I'd like to think that McVeigh would not have worked with the feds, but I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think he probably did know. I'd also like to know what's going on at Fort Bragg, right? Just like with McVeigh showing up at Waco, I think he was being conditioned during his time at Fort Bragg all the way up to the bombing, right? Maybe even earlier than when he was at Fort Bragg, right? Because these people are just geniuses at setting things up decades in advance. We have all these, air quotes, domestic terrorists coming out of Fort Bragg, now known as Fort Liberty. I'm sure some of you heard about the ones on New Year's Day, the guy that drove his car into Bourbon Street in New Orleans and then jumped out shooting at people. And then the guy in Las Vegas who exploded that Tesla truck, who they have all this shit coming out on those CIA Assets podcasts talking about he's sending the email saying that China has anti-grav technology and that's what the drones are, blah, blah, blah. But my point is, this isn't all happenstance. Like, they're doing something at Fort Bragg. And the military intelligence has a large presence at Fort Bragg, obviously now known as Fort Liberty. And that's something we need to really start questioning, because the people coming out of there are attacking Americans left and right. I also want to clarify something else as well. I don't think every single federal employee is in on some grand scheme to usher in this one world government. Not even every FBI agent or ATF agent or CIA agent, right? Like, I think some of them, maybe even most of them, have good intentions. I think they think they're doing the right thing, and sometimes they have to do... I think they think sometimes the ends justify the means. Unfortunately, these people, to me, are just more proof that the most dangerous people on the planet are these people that believe they're doing the right thing, right? If somebody thinks that they're doing a righteous cause, they can justify anything, when in reality, they're just doing the devil's work. These people are insanely dangerous because there's no convincing them otherwise. So I think self-reflection is one of the most important characteristics someone can have, because if you're not even accountable to yourself, you're not going to be accountable to anybody else. And it's going to be hard for you to leave a good impact on the world. This bombing, I think it's from the same playbook, from the same people, right? Russia in the 1910s, Germany in the 1920s, Italy in the 1920s, Spain in the 1930s. These Kabbalist Jews, Freemasons, Jesuit demons use mental manipulation to sway a population and confuse them as to what is good and what is evil. And when that doesn't work, they use this terrorism to force these changes and try to take control of everything. I think the OKC bombing is a clear example of the latter, right? They couldn't convince people that, hey, you know, these people that are speaking out of the government are evil. So they're like, okay, well, we'll make one of these people speaking out against the government do some evil shit. And then that'll allow people to side with us when we pass this legislation that, right, they're going to pass it anyway. They just care about re-election. So they want to make it look like, you know, it's a public outcry that they're just answering the call of. When in reality, it's the Hegelian dialectic, right? They create the problem and then they give you the solution. And the solution is always just them taking more and more. And in doing so, this emboldened them and showed them that they can get away with anything. So much so that they decided to perpetrate 9/11. That's the only conclusion I can come to. Waco showed them that they can burn and gas children and the majority of people won't even care. The Oklahoma City bombing showed that they can blatantly lie, even when the evidence is clear, and most will still sit by and do nothing. And then 9/11, more than anything else, showed that they have the power, the technology, and the means to convince the world of the most ludicrous of events. I mean, if you think 2 planes took down 3 fucking towers like that, you're their audience, right? You're who they're gunning for. And they love having you around. I'm not a nihilist. I'm not black-pilled. I really do want to believe in hope, and I think at the end of the day that there's so much more to existence than just this life that I don't ever just give up and say we're defeated. But looking back and seeing how they blatantly pull these kinds of events off, it really makes it hard for me to hope for humanity in its current state, right? I guess maybe the subconscious, the part of us that is connected and communicates unknowingly to us, really does want this new world order. That's one of the only conclusions I can come to. I, for one, will gladly die fighting against it, though. My soul yearns to be free. My soul yearns to spread the knowledge of being able to decide for myself, and decide for, and for my loved ones to decide for themselves. And if I ever do get blessed to have children and a family, I want them and their children after that to be able to decide what's good for them, right? Because you're never going to be a good person if somebody's making all your decisions for you, right? You have to make bad decisions to learn from them and to become a better person. I know I've made my fair share again and again and again. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't consider myself a good person. And even to this day, I would have a hard time saying that I'm a good person, but I am well on my way compared to where I was and where I came from. And I'm proud of that because I had to earn it. And I'll tell you what, it was painful. So, in conclusion, the FBI, CIA, ATF, NSA, DOD, DEA, all of these alphabet agencies have been waging a war on U.S. citizens for decades, right? At least since the early 1900s, from what I can find. But I think it was around the time the United States was incorporated in 1872 or whatever it was. Really, they've been waging a war on all citizens of this world for far too long. And they're doing it with impunity and with our funding. These people are masters at human psychology. They find these people that are radical about a certain agenda, or oftentimes they work to radicalize these individuals towards that agenda. They use mental trauma, programming, conditioning, all these things to manipulate and break people to where they can control them. They then stage an event and use these people as a patsy. So who are they really serving? Their self-interest, for sure, but I think evidence would suggest that their orders come from much higher up. Again, I hate to be the one that's kicking that dead horse, but I think it really needs to be stressed that we're right back to that spiritual war. Right? We are in a spiritual war. That, in my opinion, is an objective fact. So, to all my people that live in love, I would say hold fast. It's going to get bumpier and bumpier, but I know that love, good, decency, all the things that we know are right will triumph. They always do. We just have to get through this dark night, and we can do it together. So with that, I'm going to end this episode. As always, if you like me, please go to Spotify, go to pretty much anywhere except Apple Music that you enjoy podcasts. Listen, subscribe, comment, tell your friends. On I'm on YouTube. I'm on Rumble. Taboo Matthew. I was on X, but I quickly got suspended from X, this free speech platform. That's kind of ironic. So I believe I'm going to be starting a Facebook and an Instagram soon, maybe a Noster. I'm looking into every avenue that I can find to make sure that this keeps going, because it's something I'm passionate about, something I love doing, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well. So please, any love and support you can give, greatly appreciated. And we're just going to keep looking for the truth together. With that being said, I want to leave you guys with a quote and a promise. My promise is I'm going to try to be more consistent in doing these podcasts, in bringing you truth and love and light, and especially the hard truths, right? This is Taboo Matthew. That's kind of what it's all about, is talking about the topics that most people don't want to talk about because they're hard, right? But only through looking at these hard truths will we really come to know ourselves and really come to know the world. So the quote I'm going to leave you with is by a rapper named Tupac. I grew up listening to him. A lot's been coming out over the last decade and a half about him possibly being a CIA plant and blah, blah, blah. After doing my episode on Tavistock Institute, I think it's probably more than likely that he was some kind of CIA plant or some kind of actor that they put into the spotlight, and he maybe got too big for his britches. Either way, though, he wrote some amazing songs, and he was an amazing poet, and someone who I still look up to regardless of all that, because I think he was trying to do what was right. So here's the quote. It comes from his song Unconditional Love, and it is simply, "We must remember that tomorrow comes after the dark, so you will always be in my heart with unconditional love." And with that, I love you all. I hope you stay safe and well, and I hope to hear from you soon. Peace out.